Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Morning Java. It's the first time Carter and I have got to work together. Hopefully, many more to come. Chris, how you doing today?
Doing great, Noah. How you doing?
I'm doing well, and you know who I also hope is doing well is the fine folks at Get Go Marketing Cafe. They do it all perfect over there between the food, the coffee, the drinks, the gas, everything. They have the app. They bring the food right out to you. They do it great. That's who this episode is brought to us by, of course. Chris, would you like to insert any nice things to say about Get Go before we get started?
Of course. I just got a buffalo chicken wrap this week. You kidding me? I love me some. Also, y'all, if y'all have not had the mac and cheese bites as a side with your sandwich, it's just great.
Well, I mean, I don't want to throw the show off the rails here, but I actually don't really like cheese, so I'm going to pass on those. I know that can be another show where I get roasted. I know. Well, let's just get into the topics. We're already talking about – we're already opening with a very pressing issue at hand. I don't want to make people even more fired up here. But, Chris, we're going to open the show, of course, with talking about the biggest story in sports right now. Depending on whenever anyone watches this over the weekend, there could be another development. But as of right now, the NBA – after the Milwaukee Bucks originally started this protest, they refused to take the court and play the Orlando Magic during Wednesday's playoff matchup. The rest of the league decided to follow in their footsteps. They had no competition on Wednesday, no competition on Thursday. They agreed that they will continue the postseason, though, in what has been an unprecedented display of protest. Chris, you got the law background, you follow basketball like I do. What are your thoughts on all of this?
Well, I have to say, as a black man, I've always also followed the history of protests, especially with sports in this country, very closely. And this is by far the biggest move, the biggest protest that we can see in modern sports when it comes to black players, especially standing up against racism and police brutality. And there were white players involved in the protest as well, of course, because there's white players in the NBA, but there was a very clear message that even with all the efforts the NBA has made with, putting Black Lives Matter on the basketball court, allowing players to add messages to the back of their jerseys, their point is still that this country still isn't changing in the way that we've been pushing for, and they need to use their platform to further that change and to make a bigger statement. Now, whether or not people agree that, that postponing games or canceling games or whatever you thought that they should do, whether or not you agree that that's the best method, the point here is that they are putting forth a good faith of a good first step in their effort to say, hey, we recognize that this is a problem. We're not the legislators. We're not the people that can change the laws. We're not the people that can go in and vote, in certain situations. But we are people that are put on a pedestal. We are people that have a platform, and we're going to use our platform to let you know that this is unacceptable what our country's going through right now in response to the shooting of Jacob Blake, in response to how the Kenosha Police Department of Wisconsin has responded to it. And we saw a young white man who was a member of a militia group shoot down 3 different people and walk right by the police and receive waters and be encouraged by them to be out there with an AR-15 rifle. Meanwhile, this is the same police department that shot Jacob Blake in the back 7 times while he was unarmed. So there's obvious serious divides in our country right now, and they're saying we have to continue to push the message that we have to highlight those divides and look at them, because just ignoring them isn't working.
You talked about social activism in sports. My senior year of college, we had to do like an SCE, like a senior study project. Mine was on the history of social activism in sports, and I had to decipher if it was effective or not. And my senior year was 2017. The fall semester of that year was when Colin Kaepernick actually started kneeling, and that's what kind of inspired the project. But throughout that study, I examined a whole bunch of different instances, and what Wednesday's events reminded me of, it was less Kaepernick and more of Muhammad. I mean, people talked about, for a moment, people thought that the NBA season could just be over. And multiple teams, including the Lakers and the Clippers, who were 2 of the front runners in Vegas, they have 2 of the best players in the world. One of arguably the best of all time, said they're willing to give that up. And players making sacrifices like that remind me of Muhammad Ali when he gave away his championship belt, or guys like John Carlos and Tommy Smith in the 1968 Olympics, when they were asked to go home after winning medals for their country because they put a fist in the air and stuff like that. And there was a pause in social activism in sports, I think, like after the 70s, when athletes started getting paid really well. We didn't see it as much. And then in the 90s, when the commercials and everything, I mean, Jordan had that famous quote, "Republicans buy sneakers too." And it's really just started back up. I mean, there are instances in that time lapse there, but it's really just started back up. And it's like we're in the 60s again in multiple areas of society, not just sports social activism. And it's really interesting. It's going to be really interesting to see where this goes. My final question for you on this would be, do you think them continuing this season kind of it takes away credibility from what they did on Wednesday? Or do you think that it was the right choice considering the platform that, you know, LeBron's always going to have a big platform, but players like Fred VanVleet or other guys, you know, bench players or, you know, not household names are going to get a bigger platform to speak out on this kind of stuff?
I don't think it really took away. Listen, the people who say that they don't want to hear their players, or they don't, you know, their platform is weakened or whatever. Those are the same people that were saying, I don't watch the NBA, or I refuse to watch the NBA, that kind of nonsense. The players were looking at the best options to actually say, hey, how can we best send the message out here and do our best to keep fighting the good fight here? Would canceling everything be the best? Some people felt it might have been, because that would have hurt people's pocketbooks the biggest. You know, that would have said, hey, all this TV ad revenue, it would cause all these people to say, hey, okay, when there's unrest, when there's these problems that exist, it costs all of us money. So you'll see teams like how we saw FedEx and the Washington football team forced to change. Hey, we got to change this team name. We've seen how that impacts bigger structures. But at the same time, like you're suggesting, you know, for players like Fred VanVleet, and even for everyone, you know, yeah. Doc Rivers gave a very impassioned message earlier this week, and you don't get that platform, or you don't get as big of a platform and as big as an opportunity if you're not playing in the NBA playoff, where millions of people are watching every day and checking out what's going on, and then seeing what they're saying after the games. And I think that they still look at that as a way of, you know, this is how we can affect progress. And to anyone who says that, what's the end game here? What's the goal? The goal is to keep fighting in these causes. Like you said, it was 2 days ago was the four-year anniversary of the first time that Colin Kaepernick, you know, did not participate in the national, or didn't stand for the national anthem. Mm-hmm. That right there is a sign of where we are as far as progress. You know, even with the NBA, Mahmoud Abdul Rauf, he protested the flag back in the 90s. Yeah. And he was basically eventually blackballed and forced to play in Europe. So you look at what happened with him. And you see the progress of how things have gone throughout. And like you said, there's been people in the past that have continued their fight, from Jackie Robinson to Bill Russell to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar to Muhammad Ali to everyone. I mean, Arthur Ashe, and even we see Naomi Osaka right now. She pulled out of the semifinals of a tennis tournament. This is furthering the message that, hey, we're athletes, but we are people too. And there was a great piece on ESPN from Howard Bryant about why we have to consider their humanity as well as their athleticism.
All right, so something a little less heavy now. After a very deep and an important conversation that we opened the show with, Carter, we're the two new guys here. I mean, you're not really new. We're the two new full-time employees, but you're new to the Pit Beat, and you've been following the Panthers. The season is coming up. I mean, there's college football on this weekend. It's not FBS, it's FCS competition. But people forget college football is coming. So what have you been noticing from the Panthers this year? Give us a little preview, or what you've been working on.
Well, first of all, I think it's important to remind everyone that Pitt did get its first game back. They're playing Austin Peay at Heinz Field on September 12th. They lost their game against Miami, Ohio when the MAC canceled their season. So getting that back was a huge story for the week. But right now, all the talk is about Pitt's defense. I wrote a story about how Devin Danielson, a redshirt sophomore out of Thomas Jefferson here from, in Western Pennsylvania, he looks to be like he might be the guy that replaces Jalen Twyman at defensive tackle. And he looks like a big, strong guy. Narduzzi's been pumping him up. His teammates have been pumping him up. And there's other guys like Tyler Bentley out there that are pushing for the job, but Narduzzi feels really good about his defensive depth, even without Jalen Twyman. They also lost Amari Mathis, a starting cornerback, who he'll be able to come back next year because he is able to burn his red shirt this time around. But that opens up a cornerback battle. We're going to see players like A.J. Woods battling for that position. But all in all, this is still a defense for Pitt that has two edge rushers they're very excited about. Patrick Jones, the second, had 8.5 sacks last year. Rashad Weaver missed last year, but everyone talks about him just like they talk about Patrick Jones with how explosive he can be off the ball. You have Phil Campbell, as one of the lead linebackers right now, and what Narduzzi has called two of the best outside linebackers in the country. Then, of course, you got the X factor on defense being that Paris Ford, the superstar safety that looks like he's going to be one of the best safeties in this upcoming NFL draft. And on the opposite side of the ball, the offensive line, they'll finally be able to gel this year. They got, everyone that they're getting back this year has experience playing for the team. That wasn't the case last year. But this time they've got Jimmy Morsey leading the way at center, Warren Carter, playing really well at left tackle. They're really confident about how that group's going to be and that it can balance the offense with a little bit more of a run game. All in all, Pitt's in a really good position to put out its best year. It's just unfortunate this is going to be the weirdest year in the history of college football.
Yeah, I've noticed some hype around Yellen, another quarterback, the transfer from Arizona State. Any chance we see him push Kenny Pickett for playing time this year?
No, not pushing playing time. He would be right now. Narduzzi has said that Yellen is right in the mix for the backup quarterback battle. But this is Kenny Pickett's team. He's still the lead quarterback. He's been here this will be his third season. He's ready to push himself, and they say that he knows the offense, and it seems like the offense is very confident in him. A lot of people are talking about him. Also, watch out for Jordan Addison, true freshman receiver. Narduzzi said he's already become the starting slot receiver for the team. He compared him to Antonio Brown this week, and he was not saying that lightly. He was saying, he's like, when we asked him, like, hey, who does he remind you of? He's like, well, there was this guy I played against at Michigan State who I underestimated and at Central Michigan, and his name was Antonio Brown. And that should pop some eyes over for some people with how explosive he's been. Now, I haven't been to practice yet because no one's been to practice, but that's a lot of good signs about the offense. Yellen right now, I think the best thing he can do is if he can work himself into that top backup spot, he might get some snaps. If Pickett gets hurt or if Pitt's in a blowout situation where they're up on top or they're way far down, they'll try to get him some experience. But you want to see Pickett do well this year in his senior year and work the chemistry with receivers like Tazier Mack, running back A.J. Davis, and the new tight end they brought in from Florida, Lucas Kroll. But
speaking of comment, sorry.
No, I was going to throw it to you. I wanted to hear about Duquesne because that's your team.
I had one last question about Pitt here. You mentioned a comment made by Narduzzi this week. Also, he was a little upset about them not getting any votes for the top 25. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think the Panthers should be ranked?
I mean, I understand why they're not, and he was joking around with Jerry in the meeting because it was Will Graves brought it up as a joke, and then everyone started laughing, and then Pat just kind of fed into the joke. So I thought that was just some good fun there, and Jerry wrote about it afterwards. But I think Pitt has to understand that it has to earn its place because over the time watching it, even before covering Pitt, Pitt's had all sorts of letdowns over the years. Yep. They haven't had a 9-win season in a very long time. They've had 8-win seasons, I think, in back-to-back years now. So for Pitt to prove itself to get into that top 25, they're going to have to put in some work this year. The good news for Pitt fans is that I think this is the best year that they've had in recent memory that they'll have a chance to do that. Speaking
of a lot of talent coming back, let's talk about my Duquesne Dukes here for a second. Well, not my Duquesne Dukes, the beat that I am on, Duquesne basketball. Something you can look forward to reading this weekend. I'll have a story. It'll be out by the time this video is posted. I spoke with Duquesne basketball head coach Chief Ganbrot. Actually, just did it right before we started recording this, and he had some exciting stuff to say about the Duke's basketball team this year. He said that this is the best team that he's had, and now going into his 4th season with Duquesne. They returned 8 lettermen, including all 5 starters. He said they have their best recruiting class since he's been there. He's been talking about for the last couple years now how he wants this team to get old and stay old, and they have a lot of experience. They have a couple 5th-year guys. Like I said, they have 4-year, multiple year starters. They have guys like Hughes who have received accolades, conference accolades and everything. And there's a lot of things this team does very well. They're going to defend the rim really well. He says there's a big emphasis this year on shooting better and rebounding, but with their depth and experience, I would not be shocked to see this Duquesne team play a little bit of a spoiler and give a run for the Atlantic 10 title. Some other things we talked about, aside from his high expectations, we talked about the off season that was for this Duquesne basketball team, their summer workouts and the challenges that went along with the pandemic. He and I discussed on top of the pandemic, like what we talked about in the first segment with the social issues going on and Black Lives Matter and the talks that he's had with his players and the actions that they plan to take during the season later on to show where their heart and thoughts are at. And the final thing is, they still don't know where they're going to play. If depending on when this season starts for college basketball, they might have their new arena finished if it's in the new year, if it's in 2021. But if the season starts before that, this was a team that had 3 different home courts. This last year, they played at La Roche, they played at PPG Paints. They played all over. They even played a home game in Akron last year. So it's going to be interesting to see, A, if their stadium is finished in time, their new court's finished in time, and B, if it's not, will they be allowed to compete on other campuses with all the COVID restrictions? So a lot going on with Duquesne. You can look forward to Chris's coverage for Pitt, mine with Duquesne basketball, and a lot of good stuff for the college sports scene here in Pittsburgh.
Noah, so you've got a new podcast coming our way on the DK Sports Podcast Network here. You're calling it Memory Lane, and I'm very interested to hear more about it, because what you're telling me you're going to do is that you're going to go back throughout Pittsburgh history and grab past Pittsburgh athletes and talk to them on your show. Tell me more about what you're planning here.
Yeah, I came here to help build the podcast network, and that's what we've seen, the Daily Pirates podcast, the Daily Steelers podcast that we're both a part of, and they're doing really well. And I was just trying to think of some different content aside from team-specific stuff. And something I've always really enjoyed is hearing from athletes after their careers are over. I feel like once you hang up the cleats or the spikes or whatever, you're more inclined to open up and maybe tell some stories that you wouldn't have told as a player. You don't have PR teams teams PR looking over your shoulder. You don't have to worry about kind of stuff, those kind of things. So Memory Lane, it comes out this weekend, and I am going to be sitting down, mostly over Zoom, with former Pittsburgh athletes. And that applies to people who played for the Pirates, the Steelers, the Penguins, and even people who, played at Pitt, Duquesne, Robert Morris, wherever, and high school players, if that is. There's really no guideline on it, just people related to the Pittsburgh athletics scene who are no longer here. And hopefully we can get some unique stories and talk to some players. Obviously you want to hear from the big names. I'd love to sit down with, the legends like the Lemieux or the Terry Bradshaws or, those guys. But I want to hear from people that, who were pretty good in Pittsburgh, but you haven't heard from in a while. And I'm not going to name our first guest on the show. You got to wait for when it comes out this weekend. But this is a name that if you follow Pittsburgh sports in the 2000s, it's someone that you'll recognize immediately, and someone that when I was growing up loved watching him play. And I'm looking forward to this conversation that you're all going to get to listen to. But my question for you, Chris, if you could pick some people for me to interview, and again, lay off the big names, all right? So no Hall of Famers or anything, but who are some athletes that you think would have some interesting stories that you would like to see on this show?
I'd like to hear from some James Ferrier. I understand that 2000s Steelers defense He had a lot of experience, and I've heard a lot of things about how close that defense was and how they would sleep over in the same house, watch football games together, study things together, goof around together. I've heard some rumblings of different pranks they'd play on each other. I'd love to see something like that. Keeping with the linebacker position, Levon Kirkland, there was actually an open letter that was published recently by a Clemson website where he wrote he wrote an open letter to all of his Steelers linebackers teammates of that Pittsburgh defense, Kevin Green, Greg Lloyd, and Chad Brown, and saying about his appreciation and love for those guys in that era. I'd love to hear about those guys and what they meant for the team. Another guy that I'd like to hear from growing up, Cordell Stewart, and just his trials and tribulations as an athlete in Pittsburgh, harkening back to what I talked about in the first segment, as a black kid growing up in Pittsburgh, when you saw Cordell Stewart and you saw some of the vitriol that was thrown his way and how he got beer dumped on him, I always wondered what it was like to face that kind of pressure, and the kind of stuff that was thrown at him, coming out and working every day to improve. So there's certainly a lot of people there that I'd like to hear from. Maybe some Manny Sanguian if he gives you the time of day, but. There's so many Pittsburgh greats over the years that I would love to hear from. I'm excited to hear from on your show.
Yeah, I mean, those are all good names. I made a list of like 30 people that I'd want to hear from. I'm not going to read off all the names, but yeah, Kirkland was on that list. And Cordell was near the top. I would love to talk to him.
Is Al Oliver somewhere?
Al Oliver is at the top of the list. That's my
man. There we go.
That is my dad.
Get him in the Hall of Fame.
That is my dad's favorite player of all time. He has an autographed jersey of him. I got him for Christmas a couple years ago. Yeah, I slid into his DMs. He didn't reply yet, so maybe we could try to get a hold of Al. We could try to get Scoop on the show. But aside from Al Oliver, some guys that I really want to hear from. Yeah. John Jaso, I think would be an incredible interview. He was recently a Pirate, but he was an interesting guy, and he was right before I was on the Pirates beat for other outlets and everything. So I never really got a chance to interact with him. I think he'd be a good interview. Another one going a little different here, Rod Rutherford. I would love to talk to him about the role he played. In Pitt's victory over Penn State right before that series took a long hiatus, throwing to Larry Fitzgerald as a young, Pitt fan as a kid growing up. He was fun to watch. So those are just a couple of guys. But, like I said, my list is very long, and it goes from, like, Al Oliver to the 70s all the way up to John Jaso in a wide range of in cast of characters. So it should be a really fun series. Like I said, first episode comes out this weekend. And it's going to be a name that everyone will recognize, and I'm confident it'll be a good conversation. We've talked all week building up. I'm actually recording the interview later today, and I'm really excited for it. I know it's going to be a good one. So, Chris, final thoughts here as we head into the weekend.
Just hope everyone stays safe out there, thinking about the people down south in the country, in Louisiana and Texas, dealing with those hurricanes. If you got family down there, praying for everyone out there. It's a scary time. And also just with what's going on in our country, everyone, please stay safe, take care of yourselves, and take care of your loved ones.
Stay safe, love each other, and listen to each other. We'll see you next week here on Morning Job.